It is with much pleasure that I introduce to you our speaker and newest Rotary Adelaide honorary member, the Honorary Lucy Hood MP. Lucy is a country girl at heart, born and raised in Naracoorte. She was the first person in her family to go to university, where she studied journalism. Lucy proudly lives in Prospect with her husband and 2 children, a neighbourhood that she says has given her her home, her family and her job. She's been a public policy writer, a former journo, advisor to the then Premier Jay Weatherill and the then opposition leader Peter Malinauskas. Also, in her spare time, she's a marriage celebrant, a self-confessed baker, and you may see her riding around in Prospect on her Vespa. Her mantra is, "Together we can do better." So Rotarians and guests, please welcome our speaker, the Honorary Lucy Hood MP.
Thanks so much, Gildy. I would like to say a warm namani, mani napudni, nainari Lucy Goodnato Hood, Ghana Mirananadlu, Ghana Yata Tampanindi, Natalia. So I just spoke in the traditional language of the Ghana people. I'm currently learning Ghana through my teacher, Elder Uncle Tamaru, as I believe it is just one way in which I can individually contribute towards the journey towards reconciliation. So I said hello and welcome. That I am Lucy. I'm the third born in my family, and I acknowledge that we meet today on the lands of the Ghana people and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you so much for having me here this afternoon and inducting me as an honorary member of Rotary. This is a very special moment actually for me because 20 years ago this month I participated in the Rotary Adventure in Citizenship in Canberra in 2002. So I can blame all of you for having to be here today because it was an incredibly formative experience. I was a country kid and to get opportunities like that was quite rare, and a teacher saw that I had an interest in civics and politics and put me up for this opportunity, which I was lucky to receive. So 20 years ago, I headed off to Canberra with a variety of kids from across Australia and participated in this adventure in citizenship, and it was an incredible experience, and I came back feeling energised and excited about what my future would look like. But yes, as I was saying, I grew up in Naracoorte in the southeast. My mum was in aged care. My father lived on our family farm at Bullagoon in the south, between Naracoorte and Penola, and my mum and I was raised by my mum and stepdad. So mum worked in aged care, my stepdad worked at the local men's clothing store. So we were an everyday family, but all that changed for us one night. We were sitting on the couch watching TV, and there was a knock at the door. And it was our family doctor, and he was there to tell us something that you couldn't really tell someone over the phone, and that was that my beautiful stepdad Patrick had an incredibly rare form of cancer. And so began my connection with Adelaide. Through a social worker, we were able to access support accommodation in Hutt Street. So we moved up from Naracoorte into Hutt Street so that Patrick could start his cancer treatment at the old Royal Adelaide Hospital. What I remember from that moment was that being a country kid, I thought that community only existed in, I guess, country towns. I never realised that you could find pockets of community in the middle of a city, and that's what we did find in Hutt Street. It really became a home away from home. And there is a little door on Hutt Street, a little bottle green door, which is where we stayed, and where now, over 20 years later, I drive down that street almost every day, and I look at that bottle green door, and I guess it's become an anchor and a daily reminder of the things that I care about and that I want to fight for. So what happened when we moved up to Adelaide is that Patrick had treatment, but 2 years into that treatment, we lost him. So we went from a everyday family who could afford to pay their bills to ones that were struggling. My 2 older brothers had left home. My little brother was only 5, and so I grew up from the age of 15. I help mum pay the bills. I got part-time work, whether it was waitressing or I would sell actually raffle tickets to the Chook raffle at Billy Mac's, the sports bar, on a Friday night. So nothing prepares you for politics more than a country sports bar, let me tell you. But I helped out mum a lot, and it was during that time that I remember mum, that summer after we lost Patrick, running out to the letterbox every day, just always checking the letters. There was a lot of condolence cards, a lot of bills coming in, but she was looking for something, and I didn't know what that was. And one day I opened an envelope and I saw the look of relief on mum's face, because what we'd received was something called the school card, and it meant that mum could afford to pay for my school books that coming year. So I went to my country public high school, to the library, to collect those school books, and realised that there was one line for the school card kids and one line for everyone else. And so it was the first time probably in my life that I did realise that, you know, there were people that did have and people that didn't. There was advantage, there was disadvantage. But what was incredibly important, that I was being given an opportunity to have the same education as everybody else. And that started me on a bit of a journey towards the empowerment of education and the fact that it is the great equaliser. And I worked incredibly hard at school in order to become the first in my family to go to university. Specifically, I wanted to study journalism because I adored meeting new people. I love hearing their stories and I love telling their stories. It was a bittersweet moment because it meant leaving my country town that I loved. It's where my family was, and moving up to the big cities. So I think my housemates and I cried all the way from Naracoorte to Canalpin. So, and then we kind of got excited by the fact that we didn't have any parents or anyone looking over our shoulder so we could get up to no good. I tell this funny story as a country kid that we moved into a house and we noticed that someone had left a perfectly good couch on the side of the road. And we went, my God, that's a good couch. And so we waited till 1 a.m. in the morning and dressed in head to toe in black, we crept out to take the said couch, only realising a year later there was this thing called hard rubbish where you were actually welcome to take whatever was on the side of the road. So we thought, we were dabbling in espionage there. But I moved up, I started studying journalism. The thing about me is that I'm the type of person who wants things done yesterday. So 2 years into my degree, I went, I know enough. I'm going out into the world. I'm going to be a journalist. So I applied for a cadetship at the Advertiser, and I was lucky enough to get that. And I became the education reporter at the Advertiser, so that I could go into schools, I could write stories of students and teachers, and it was a really wonderful thing. But adventure would come calling, and I decided I would go to London and run a pub. So that is what I did. And so we'd jump behind the bar and I'd be pouring beers. It was a pub called the Naracoorte in London, in Angel, in Islington, on Regent's Canal. And I just have to say what happened in London stays in London, so we'll leave it there. So I came back, jumped back into journalism and became the education editor. But I guess around that time I started getting a bit frustrated. I didn't just want to tell the stories that people were telling me. I wanted to take what they were telling me and do something with it. And I knew that the power of that lied in public policy and in government. So I made the big decision to leave journalism and start working in government. I worked for a variety of ministers. The natural transition was to media advising, being a journalist, but my passion really did lie in public policy. And so I started working for a variety of ministers, but eventually moved into Treasury because I thought, well, there's no point in having a good policy if you don't know how to get the money for it. So I worked for a number of years under the Treasurer, delivering state budgets. And one particular policy I was really proud to drive with my colleague Emily was a project called Fund My Neighbourhood, where we actually put the power in the community's hands to decide where the money was spent, because no one knows a community better than the people that live in it. So Emily and I were very proudly behind the Fund My Neighbourhood project, and that was definitely one of the highlights of my career working in Treasury. I began writing public policy for Jay Weatherill. We lost the 2018 election and I moved to be the Director of Policy for our now Premier, Peter Malinauskas. And that is where I went, well, I don't just want to write policy, I want to be the person on the floor of Parliament that is turning that policy into legislation and into law. So I decided to put up my hand to run for the seat of Adelaide. It was not an easy decision. They had a hard-working member in the seat who was an incumbent for 12 years in Rachel. So I knew that if I was going to run that I would have to literally throw everything at it. And that is why I decided to run a 2-year campaign, which is quite rare. A lot of campaigns, at the most are maybe 9 months or 6 months. But I decided that I would campaign solidly for 2 years. And that involved really 99.9% of the time is just knocking on doors. So I always say if you turn around and I've randomly found a door and I'm knocking on it, it's just a reflex that I've come to have. It was quite a lonely 2 years, really. I spent most of the time by myself. Only 1 in 3 people are usually home. And then you have to factor in who actually then does want to talk to you rather than just probably slamming the door in your face. But most people are willing to chat. But yeah, most of my time was literally just walking the streets of Adelaide. I managed to door knock every part of our electorate of 25,000 voters over those 2 years, and then actually went back and door knocked on some people's homes twice or sometimes even 3 times. In all the advancements of technology and campaigning, nothing actually beats just knocking on someone's door and asking them what they care about and what the local issues are. Nothing will ever beat that. And it was a wonderful experience, and it meant that I got a really broad cross-section of the people that live in our community, but also the issues and the things that they care about. And that leads me to, I guess, the policies and the commitments that I made during the state election and why I made those specific commitments. And it really does come down to those years of moving into Hutt Street and understanding what a community is and what keeps people connected and what makes people feel a part of a community and not be isolated. And it really is that main streets. One of my commitments was to invest in our main streets, just like my main street down in Naracoorte, Smith Street and Ormerod Street. It's a place of connection where people feel welcome, where they can go down and have a cup of coffee and people know your name. Something very powerful about someone knowing your name. And so I've invested money into reactivating Hutt Street, reactivating Melbourne Street, because I know how important those main streets are to a community. It's about investing in community hubs, so things like a new Adelaide Aquatic Centre, which brings people together from all ages and all walks of life. That is something that's so incredibly unique and important, to be able to come into a community hub and see people from all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds, all ethnicities. That is something that's incredibly important and something that should be fostered and protected. And hence why I'm building a new Adelaide Aquatic Centre to keep people healthy, keep them local and keep them connected. There's another community hub in Walkerville in Smith Street, just next to the Oval there, and it shut down about 18 months ago to the devastation of the community. And so one of my commitments was investing to bring that back as a community hub. People don't need gold-plated infrastructure. They don't need the Taj Mahal. They just want a place where they can come together and connect with people and get to know people, and like I said, where people know your name. And I'm also investing in commitments that get people from A to B and keep them connected, and that is why I'm very passionate about the Free City Connector bus and why I ran a campaign to protect the funding and secure a long-term funding agreement for that service after it was under threat of having some of its funding cut. There's a lovely local artist who uses the service. His name is Robert Eckert. He has an intellectual disability. I met him a couple of years ago, and he showed me a piece of art that he'd created. He called it the Bump Along, and he said that when he sat on the Free City Connector, he would take his pen to a piece of paper and he'd let the Free City Connector and the route of the bus decide what it looked like on his page, and then he would colour it into a beautiful, colourful piece of art. And it's little stories like that really connect with me, that for him, the Free City Connector wasn't just a place to get from A to B to access services, to feel part of a community, but it was also, quite an inspiration for him. And so that is why a lot of my commitments do focus on keeping people connected and feeling part of a community. And I just wanted to also take a moment, I guess, to reflect on the other important thing that you can give is just your time. And that is something I'm learning now, how precious our time is. And the fact is that all of you in this room give your time to Rotary and give time to causes that you're passionate about and you give back. And so I just want to really just say thank you for being part of that, for the time that you gave me 20 years ago to be able to be just a country kid who had really only ever come to Adelaide a couple of times, to give me that opportunity to have gone to Canberra and sparked in me a passion for civics and politics and community. And the fact is that would never have happened without people like you in this room. So thank you so much for the opportunity that you gave me. I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't have opportunities like that. And I wish everyone all the best, and thank you again. It is such an incredible honour to be inducted as an honorary Rotary member today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I think we'll all agree it was fantastic listening to her journey coming from Naracoorte right through to currently being an MP in our Parliament. It's wonderful to have you as our honorary Rotarian, someone that's actually living and breathing what you believe in, and to represent us in Parliament with such passion and dedication, particularly to the local people in your electorate. We have some time for a few wonderful questions. So we have a roaming mic at the back. So please put your hand up. We'll give you the mic, and then please just introduce yourself and talk to the top of the microphone.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you, okay.
Yeah, you wanted to go.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Sorry. Florian Plöckel. I'm an academic at Adelaide Uni.
Hi, Florian.
It's more like a practical question because you've put a lot of focus on local community. On the other hand, you're a member of state parliament, essentially if the part for the whole part. So where do you see the boundaries between effectively what is the prerogative of the local council should do with this, and then you have like the state parliament should do with this? I mean, there's currently this debate about kind of, for example, with the Adelaide City Council and we're closing this road, and then state parliament, the premier saying like, maybe you're not closing the road, or these kind of things about kind of like where do the bike paths go and who gets to build the bike paths or the food trucks. So there are all these kind of stories where you have state parliament, you have local communities. Where do you see the sense of saying like do we kind of like separate that, or do we kind of like combine it in a particular way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks, Florian. And that is the challenge, I think, of having a capital city seat in particular, because you are the capital city. You want to have those big events that actually encourage people into the city. But at the same time, particularly since COVID, if we want to grow our city, what we need are residents. And so that is I think the big challenge, and it's about trying to find that balance. So that is separate as a capital city issue, I think. Then is the other issue around, for example, in a town, suburb like Prospect, where do you see that boundary? I personally don't, as much as probably the council find that very annoying, but but I do like to involve myself in those issues, whether it's Walkerville. And where they're redeveloping an oval there. No, I actually do insert myself into those issues because they're things that the community care about. If the community cares about it, I care about it. And so I see my role as absolutely advocating for them and working with council to get things done. But yeah, back to this, the city, that is a big challenge around how we find that balance when we are the capital city, and that we really need to work to build our city and create it, be vibrant, a place that is on the map, but at the same time acknowledging that we do actually want to grow our resident base, and so their voices matter too.
Thank you so much for your inspiring speech.
Thank you.
So lovely to hear about your roots in the community in the southeast. My question is around the constant. It's just cutting in and out.
Sorry about that. It's okay.
My question is around a constant frustration I have when I see empty buildings, not only in the city but also out in the suburbs, which sit for years, literally years, going to rack and ruin when they could have such an important part in community spaces, in also accommodation for people, affordable accommodation. Whether there's any way that any legislation can impose some sort of restrictions on people as to, if you buy a building, because it looks like so many of them are left to go to wreck and ruin, so then they say, oh, it's too late, we have to demolish it now. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, particularly on the heritage point, we did want to beef up some of the requirements around that in terms of, if someone is wanting to look at demolishing a state heritage building, making sure that we've got full public consultation and a report to the Heritage Council. But funnily enough, that issue came up with me at the electorate last week. There is just opposite the wine centre, there's that particularly old building just on the corner there. And you drive past it every day, you see it go just further and further into rack and ruin. And I actually I've had a few people say, what's going on there? Why are we just leaving that there? Really, because it is an entrance statement to the city as well. From the eastern suburbs. So I actually wrote to and contacted the Environment Minister on that particular one just to say, what can we look at there? Understand the landlord's in his late 90s, so mid to late 90s, so it might not be a focus for him. Actually, then you go over to the start of Hutt Street and there's a beautiful old mansion there that actually is a case of heritage vandalism. It's called Devar House. And that has fallen into absolute disrepair. Again, that's a really important catalyst entrance statement to Hutt Street, an important catalyst if we can get that going as well. So, but all of these types of buildings, I guess the biggest challenge is that they are incredibly expensive to get back up and running. And that is the biggest challenge, isn't it? And that's where we probably require, a little bit of social licence from perhaps the people who own them to kind of step up and say, all right, well, I'm going to bring this back up to scratch, because you also have to factor in that to like you said, legislation or impost, you still have to be able to promote South Australia as a good place to do business and own property, and so it is that very fine balance. If it was easy, I think someone would have already done it already. And so it's about identifying those pieces of property and working with the owners at a main street level. We do have Renew Adelaide, the organisation, I'm not sure if you've heard of, that actually does work with those kind of empty buildings, works with the owners and tries to get kind of startups or people wanting to maybe look at considering starting their own business into those stores to almost as like a pilot. And that's a way of putting someone into that empty shop front to create a sense of vibrancy. Maybe the idea takes off, maybe it doesn't, but at least we've had a little, we don't have an empty building just going to rack and ruin and really bringing down the street. I guess, that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats, so that if we can bring a whole street up to scratch, well, then everyone benefits. But yeah, absolutely is an interesting policy challenge that we face, particularly with the rental crisis and homelessness issue.
Thank you, Lucy. That was terrific. I reckon I was one of the houses that you door knocked at least twice, so thank you for that.
You're welcome.
There is a lot of conversations I'd love to have with you around development, the culture of Parliament and women in Parliament and how that's moving forward. But one of the things I'd like to hear your view on is around the parklands. And so I'm quite a passionate supporter of our parklands. And I worry when I hear about people wanting to use the parklands for other purposes.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely a really relevant question. So it did become a political hot potato during the state election, particularly because there was a real differentiation between the two parties, Liberal and Labor, and that was around whether or not we would build a riverbank arena on the parklands. We chose at that not to, and that our priority would be reinvesting that money into the health system instead, to address the issues within the health system, particularly ramping And so this was an issue that did come up quite a lot for me. And the park is called Helen Mayo, Helen Mayo Park. And I'm very pleased that one of my commitments was to restore protection, parklands zoning to that site, which I'm excited to say has been done. I can announce that today, I think. Yep, sorry, Planning Minister. Hope he doesn't find out. No, but we are restoring protection to that and retaining it as parklands. But then there is that challenge of, say, for example, we are building a new Adelaide Aquatic Centre on Park 2, and we're looking at retaining the existing site while we build a new one. And that causes a lot of, a lot of feeling in the community. I door knocked, was it yesterday or the day before? I went back out door knocking on Barton Terrace West just to connect in with residents and hear their thoughts. And I guess you have to have that conversation. There are parklands purists who don't want to see anything on the parklands. There is the other side of the coin where people wanted the crows to come in and build an aquatic centre. There were people in the community that wanted that. They said, well why can't we? And then there are perhaps people somewhere in the centre who say, as long as we can have that, community creating and fostering infrastructure like an aquatic centre, is there a way that we can create that balance? And so there are some things I'm passionate about in terms of building that new aquatic centre. It's making sure that there isn't any net loss of parklands, that we're returning the existing site to parklands, and that we try wherever possible to lessen the impact on the natural environment. I am very passionate about it. I was saying, I think perhaps to Gildy before, that my family farm is called Mulberry Farm because we named it after the 100-year-old mulberry tree on our farm. Like, I've grown up to value and protect our natural and built heritage. And so that is something that I am taking into this role and hoping that we can find a balance.
We have a question from...
Thank you, Lucy. My name's David Egan, and I was in Tudor House at Naracoorte High School in about 1965.
I was Robertson.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, and I started work at the corner of Ormerod Street and Smith Street, Naracoorte.
Wonderful.
In 1966. Anyway, that's
amazing.
me. But, what I wanted to ask you a bit about was a lot of the country towns these days, banks closing, even hospitals closing, post offices, they struggle for employment. So just wondering what your party's policy is in regard to the country towns of South Australia.
Thank you very much. It's always lovely seeing a fellow Naracoorte High student. I'm not sure, you might have seen directly after the election, I think it was 2 days after, the Premier jumped on a plane and went straight down to Mount Gambier. And it was to acknowledge the fact that it is our second largest city in this state, but it perhaps doesn't get the attention it deserves. Now, I had the unique situation where I was running as the Labor candidate for Adelaide, and my brother was running as the Liberal candidate for Mount Gambier. Our Christmases are a lot of fun. And so I'm always very acutely aware of what's happening in the regions because my brother and I have some very fierce debates about it. But the Premier is at pains to make sure that we are focusing on the regions. I think he said, we need the regions more than the regions need us, and by that he means the city. Health is obviously a passion of mine. Just as an example, Naracoorte Hospital, it's where I was born, it's where my 3 brothers were born, it's where we lost my beautiful stepdad and where my grandfather passed away. And so I'm very proud that we are actually investing in that hospital, and we are upgrading that hospital, and we're investing in Mount Gambier, we're investing in more ambulances and paramedics, etc. So it is an absolute focus. Another thing we reintroduced was a thing called Country Cabinet that was demolished under the previous government, where we actually do go out to the regions. The entire cabinet goes out to listen to the community and help us advocate for the things that they care about.
We have time for one last question from Elizabeth Davis.
Thank you. Thank you for your address. It was very interesting. Another fellow southeasterner, so we're all in the right pot. just so that you understand, I'm the CEO for Raising Literacy Australia.
Fantastic.
So you will understand the interest I have in your thoughts when it comes to education, obviously journalism, which flows through, and then, of course, the Royal Commission that's going to occur. And I was just wondering your thoughts around, at this point, and obviously things will change, your thoughts around what you would see as probably the key objectives to come out of that.
Great. And that is such a wonderful organisation. I've actually volunteered putting together the book packs for little ones. Yeah, so I think that's wonderful. And we've taken some of your books, and whenever I find a new baby in the electorate, I give them a few of your books. So yeah, it's lovely. Yes, coming from an education journalism background, that was a policy that I worked on with our Deputy Premier, Dr. Susan Close. One of the policy arms, which we just talked about last week, was introducing a mid-year intake, for example, for preschool and reception from next year and the year after. I think the main aim for that is an acknowledgement that we are dropping down in PISA scores when it comes to our educational levels compared to other OECD countries, and that we need to reverse that. And it really does start in those first 1,000 days of life. And that is why the policy for background is to look at introducing universal access to 3-year-old preschool. So basically it means rather than just starting kindy at 4, that we would offer that from 3. And not just for the educational benefits that might have, or the early intervention that you might be able to occur through either speech or development, but also as a social policy. For me, it was breathtaking, in a bad way, how challenging it was to have 2 children in childcare when I went back to work. And so to have that support for women, or it might be men, for them to be able to get back into the workforce as well, I think there are significant benefits. But if we can have children access that learning and support earlier, I think that can only flow through to better educational outcomes in the long term. Along the way, we are doing other things around, we're acknowledging that not everyone will go to university, and so it's almost a case of back to the future, but we are building 5 new trade schools or technical colleges. Because we acknowledge that someone can be brilliant, they can just be brilliant, with their head and their hands, and that we need to be a country that still makes things and have people who can make things. And I'd have to argue probably between an academic and a tradie at the moment. I know which one's doing really well with the construction boom, and they probably don't have a HECS debt to show for it. But yeah, having those trade schools and having those other pathways for kids, not just simply university and academia, I think is really important as well.
Thank you, Lucy. Well, thank you, Lucy, for your talk today, and thank you for being so generous with your time. We know as a new MP you must be enormously busy, and so we thank you, and it's nice to get so many connections with Rotary and with Rotarians in the room. I'd like to present you with a thank you certificate and the Rotary Teddy. Yes, it's very special.
Lovely. Oh, thank you so much. My kids are going to have to fight me for this.
Yes, it's very cruel to give you one when you have 2 children. I understand that. It's bad on our part.
And I just thought I'll leave this up here in case anyone wants to. I have my group photo and letter from Rotary from when I got my adventuring citizenship. I've kept it all these years. And I guess you could kind of see which path I was going down, but that's me with bomber Kim Beazley. Yeah, so even though Howard was the Prime Minister, there was only one man I was interested in meeting. So I'll leave this here in case anyone would like to look at it.
So we're incredibly impressed that you've been able to go to the right drawer and pull that out, yes. And that it's so long ago. That's wonderful organisational skills. We just want you to know that the money raised today goes directly to Rotary community and youth projects, and you coming along today helps us raise that money. Wonderful. So please, Rotarians and guests, please thank our speaker today.
Thank you so much.